And good afternoon, folks. Thank you for tuning in to Arcane Radio, the podcast of the paranormal that tries to bring you the best and the latest in the world of the strange and unexplained. I'm Sean Forker. Of course, my good friend and your good friend, the pulse of the paranormal, Lon Strickler, is joining me. Lon, how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well today. Very lovely day.
It is very lovely. Temperature's nice. Just a little cloudy here, but otherwise pretty beautiful in the Susquehanna River Valley.
Yeah, we're down here in the Chesapeake. We're sunny and it's a little warmer than what it normally was. But I love it.
You know, what a tumultuous week for us here in the States. You know, another sweeping victory by the Republicans, and I don't know what that means for us, but
I guess we'll find out.
I guess we'll find out. But above and beyond that, Lon, because I was following the news this week because of the politics, how about that asinine story out of Fort Lauderdale, that 90-year-old man arrested for feeding the homeless?
Yeah, you know, I saw mention. I did notice that, and I don't know. You know, we do live in this world where it seems like the thing that you should do isn't standard now. I mean, it's you know, it's all politically motivated, and I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. It's just sad, though.
Well, it irritates the hell out of me, you know, and I guess it's kind of personal for me. My grandparents, at least 3 times a week, volunteer at a local place where they feed the hungry 3 times a week. They give them, you know, a decent meal. And my grandparents volunteer there, and they're in their 70s. This man's 90, you know, about 20 years their senior. And, you know, they're doing what they were taught to do when they were, you know, when they were kids. And that's help, you know, love your neighbor, help them out. And now these people are being arrested. The man treated like a criminal, Mr. Arnold Abbott. He was arrested 2 times in 1 week, along with 2 local pastors. And he's the founder of the Love Thy Neighbor Foundation. And he fought in 1999 against Fort Lauderdale for a very similar situation. But when this man was arrested, he was told to drop the plate immediately, like it was some sort of weapon. A plate of food that he had prepared for, you know, the people. And they're feeding about 300 folks, Lon. And on October 22nd, Fort Lauderdale made a public food sharing against the law, punishable by 60 days in jail and a $500 fine.
Well, I'm quite sure it's the powers to be in the town or the, you know, the city, because it's you know, this just seems like one of these laws that somebody brought up at a council meeting and it got pushed through, and you know, then everybody's got to suffer for it because somebody didn't like to see people sitting out, you know, seeing out and being an eyesore.
Absolutely ridiculous.
You know, and that's what it's coming to, unfortunately. And it does happen other places.
Yeah, the National Coalition for the Homeless, Lon, reported in October that there was a 47% increase in the number of cities that have passed legislation to restrict food sharing.
That's ridiculous.
It is, 47%. In a time where unemployment was on the rise, the economy is still not in great shape. People are having a hard time finding jobs. And now it's illegal to help feed them, which is just the biggest crock of shit. But if you want to make a difference, folks, I encourage you to call 954-828-5003, and that's the number to the mayor's office of Fort Lauderdale, and voice your displeasure with the rulings and the treatment of Mr. Arnold Abbott and his fellow, and the 2 pastors that were arrested. Just ridiculous. And I don't use this as a public forum too often, Lon, to promote some sort of political cause, but you know, when something like that's going on, you know, people need food, and you know, they need their dignity, and the last thing you need to do is arrest them because they can't afford to have food, and you definitely shouldn't be arresting the people providing it for them.
Well, you know, you see on TV all the time that you know, they want you to send money to help kids and families in other countries, and you know, that's a big deal, and you know, then they don't even want you to feed the people that need it here in the United States. It is really sad, and I have noticed some of that around here. I know less and less people have gotten involved with it. You know, I don't know for the exact reasons why. I don't know if there's a liability reason behind it, but as far as jurisdictions doing this type of thing is just it's just sad.
It is, and I personally, I don't believe that we should ever be legislating laws that make it more difficult for people or families to be fed or be comfortable.
Well, they just want to. They basically people that have the money in the area, or have their nice homes and all, just want to warehouse these people, put them someplace where they can't see them. They don't want to see them out on the street eating.
Yeah, we don't mind the fact that we have homeless and the hungry. We just don't want to see them eating out on the beach or out in the park. So I don't know. It's just, hate to use so much of our precious time here on the show to talk about it, but we needed to, because we have to be talking about things like this. It's a human rights issue. It's a humanity issue, and one thing you and I are passionate about, Lon, it's people and the world we live in. But moving on, you posted some interesting articles this week. One you sent me via Facebook Messenger involving our good friend Katie Elizabeth and Dennis up at Lake Champlain. Beluga whale, perhaps.
A beluga whale, possibly. There may be something to that, though. The fact is that there is beluga whale activity in St. Lawrence Seaway. There is a connection to the lake. I don't know how deep the connection is. I think it's probably possible. Katie had talked about there being tunnels connecting to the seaway. Also that there were aquifers as well. The sonic readings they got did really sound a lot like belugas from comparison with other sonic readings, and they do know whatever is in there does move around in groups. Now, the fact that they haven't seen any blowhole activity kind of makes it difficult to believe it in a way. But then again, I don't know. I'm kind of stumped. I saw it yesterday, and it kind of surprised me. So I got a hold of Katie, and she says that they think there's something very similar to that there. So I don't know. I guess it is a possibility, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, people have reported things surfacing at the lake briefly. Could be coming up to get that air. Maybe, I don't know, we're not close enough or paying attention enough to notice some sort of discharge from it. But I think that with the echolocation and everything, it's definitely a possibility.
It very well may be. And but it's interesting, and it's interesting to think about, and the fact that they are getting these readings, and that there have been so many sightings of whatever up there. Maybe there's something to it.
I don't know. I'd like to think so. It's a pretty interesting story, and I know she'll keep us informed on the latest updates. And another thing, Lon, I saw on Phantoms and Monsters this week, that horrendous infestation of orb weaver spiders in Baltimore. Frightening as hell.
Yeah, I think that those pictures are a couple years old, but they finally got around to reporting it. Yeah, I used to work in a factory in Baltimore, near Baltimore. It was a paper mill recycling factory, and we used to have the same problem with these things. And they will get up there in the rafters, and they are hell to get down. They're very, very strong webbing, and like I said in the story, it'll pull fluorescent lighting down. They're that thick. It's got to be near water because of the midge and mayfly activity that comes off the water, so they be fed. Which where I worked at, we were right beside the Tapsco. So yeah, and they get to be well, especially where I was, they get to be a real problem because it was a paper recycling mill, and paper dust would get up into the webs, and you get the right conditions, those things will light up.
up in smoke.
Up in smoke.
And
start fires.
Not in the Cheech and Chong kind of way either. So,
No.
I mean, I guess I didn't think about that, the paper dust being combustible, but you did notate that in the blog.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be a pretty... Still, just imagine walking into that place and seeing it. It's like your most horrifying nightmare.
Arachnophobia, yeah.
True. I don't know if I could do it. Lon, what do you got for this week?
Oh, I don't know. I got a few things. Well, the most important one was an article written for me by David Hose down in Florida. He's he has written a couple other stories about Florida bizarre activity, and he offered this week. He called it the return of the Okeechobee ogre.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So he wrote that a Florida couple from Palmdale had just reported their recent sighting of a large, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature. They spotted the creature while they were camping along Fish-Eating Creek, close to Lakeport, Florida. They were camping near some Indian mounds not far from the site of Fort Center, an area that saw heavy fighting during the Second Seminole Wars. Lakeport is a small retirement and fishing community on the west side of Lake Okeechobee. The mounds are considered a sacred site for Native Americans and contain artifacts along with human remains. There is a small artificial lake among the mounds that is believed to be a charnel pond for human corpses. Now, this couple reported hearing and then seeing a large hairy beast outside of their tent in the middle of the night. And the next morning, they found a carcass of a partially eaten deer nearby.
Just for the record, my mother-in-law was in Hazleton around that time.
Oh, okay. They also found some long reddish brown hairs on a branch. Although it has now been mostly forgotten, back in the late 1990s, the Lakeport area was the epicenter of a wave of skunk ape sightings. Now, the first sighting, which wasn't widely reported, happened early one morning in 1995 or 1996. Two hunters and their dogs were traveling by boat down Fish-Eating Creek, intending to hunt on ranch land that bordered both sides of the creek. They were hunting illegally, so they were trying to sneak in and out without being seen. As they traveled down the creek in their boat, they heard something on the shore and then caught a bad scent. Thinking it might be wild hogs, the hunters steered the boat to the shore, and the hunter up front prepared to jump out. However, the dog refused to leave the boat. The hunter finally jumped on shore, and his flashlight shone on a large creature covered in dark hair that was standing on its hind legs. The hunter immediately jumped back into the boat, and the other hunter threw the boat into reverse and headed back into deeper water. Now, they could hear the creature trying to follow them. According to the hunters, that was a no bear. The first widely reported sighting was on November the 2nd, 1997. Fishing guide Ronald Mosley was taking a young couple on an airboat tour when the woman saw what she described as someone in an ape suit. Neither Mosley nor her husband saw the creature, which disappeared into the woods. Although the woman's claim was not taken seriously, two local fishermen had a sighting a few weeks later. Brian Hammock claimed that he and his companion saw a creature emerge from an alligator hole in the bank. The creature was reported as being hairy and about 6 to 7 foot tall. It left the water and disappeared into the sawgrass. Brian reported going to the area after his sighting and seeing tracks and noticing a god-awful smell. By the summer of 1998, there have been quite a few more sightings of what came to be known as the Okeechobee ogre. Locals were selling memorabilia and guides were taking visitors on skunk ape tours. There was even an ogre webcam. According to the fish camp owner, Jim Smith, his camp was Skunk Ape Central. Smith had several sightings of the creature and made several plaster casts of prints. Now, according to Smith, the creature is about 7 foot tall and has a horrible smell. Smith claimed to be leaving fish guts out for the creature to eat. Over time, the sightings dropped off, the webcam was taken down, and the T-shirt stopped selling. The creature disappeared until now. So that's the report I got. So apparently something's roaming around down there again. I don't know of this specific area. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. Where there being these swamp aches. Of course, we hear these things all over the place down in southern Florida. So,
I don't know if I ever heard of the Okeechobee ogre, but we do get a lot of reports of the, I guess we would call it the generic skunk ape, coming across all parts of Florida, and these are some pretty good reports. I'd like to hear more from David.
Yeah, he does. He puts a lot of effort into his, into the reports he does. It's not always cryptid. He does. He did a thing about some hauntings in some areas down where he lives at too. So he's done some. I think this is maybe the third or fourth article he's submitted to me. I've got a couple people that submit articles, which I'm grateful for because it brings light a lot of things, a lot of stories that are not as well known as something that doesn't really hit the news that much. Mm-hmm. As far as maybe crypto or paranormal world. So I'm grateful for that. But this is fairly interesting. Not last summer. I think it was last summer where they had that multiple sighting of the skunk ape down in just outside of I think it was just outside of Clearwater, not too far in that area, which is a known area for skunk ape sightings. So I don't know. Maybe something else come up from this area. The Okeechobee Lake. Maybe something else will be coming up from there.
Don't know. We got a lot to talk about today, though, with our upcoming guest, Stan Gordon.
Yeah, Stan got a hold of me about 3 or 4 weeks ago and was asking me about flying cryptid reports, if I had seen or heard anything. And I really hadn't at the time. I had mentioned that on the blog that I haven't really been seeing that much or getting that much. He said he was at a conference and he had people coming up to him through the whole conference giving him reports of these. And I think most of them were these giant bat reports in Pennsylvania. And he also got one in Massachusetts, if I remember correctly. So, he got a hold of me and wanted to know, what I had been hearing. Now, I did get one last week, of course, with that sighting up near Erie. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I still don't know what that was all about. This thing looked like I don't know what it looked like. It looked like the wings looked like it was a bat, but the body itself was kind of odd looking. And for whatever reason, the eyes kind of showed up, though the photo left a lot to be desired. So, I don't know what that is. So, but I haven't talked to Stan about it. So I'm interested to hear what he has to say about that.
Me too. Reports of these flying cryptids in PA have picked up over the last few years. In fact, I live in the northern central part of the state, and this area is becoming a hot spot for flying cryptid sightings. And when I was on my way up to an investigation a couple weeks, well, actually, it's more than a couple weeks ago. It's been about a month and a half ago. There was some cars pulled off to the side of the road and up, and they were looking at some eagles flying and one roosting in a tree, and I thought that was pretty cool, and it just kind of struck me as we're starting to get an awful lot of eagles and seeing an awful lot of eagles up this way. So sometimes I wonder, maybe perhaps this is something some of the people are seeing.
That very well may be. I mean, I've had people that have seen these, have seen turkey buzzards and just flip out. And, if you've never been close to a turkey buzzard, you really don't know how big those things are when they spread their wings out, and they can get quite big. But not to the point where it's something that's cryptid. But people have been seeing some large birds. Now I don't know if it's another type of natural species that's coming into the area. I don't know. Some of the reports I've read don't seem to suggest that. But maybe Stan has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. And a little bit about Stan Gordon. He's got a pretty decent bio, so I'll go ahead and read that now, Lon, so folks can get familiar with Stan before we bring him on the program. Stan Gordon was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. He worked in the advanced consumer electronics sales field for over 40 years. Stan has lived in Greensburg, Pennsylvania all his life. Gordon began his interest in the UFO subject and other strange incidents at the age of 10 in 1959. In the late 1960s, he acted as the telephone UFO sighting report investigations coordinator for the UFO Research Institute of Pittsburgh. Stan began in the field investigations of UFOs and other mysterious events in 1965 and is the primary investigator of the December 9th, 1965 UFO crash recovery incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. In 1969, Gordon established a UFO hotline for the public to report UFO sightings to him to investigate. In 1970, Gordon founded the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group, the first of 3 volunteer research groups which he would establish to investigate UFO sightings and other strange occurrences reported in Pennsylvania. Since November 1993, he continues to investigate and document strange incidents from across the Keystone State as an independent researcher. Gordon is a former PA State Director for the Mutual UFO Network and was its first recipient in 1987 of the MUFON Meritorious Achievement in a UFO Investigation Award. Gordon has been involved with the investigation of thousands of mysterious encounters from across Pennsylvania. He has appeared on numerous local and network TV and documentary shows, including the Sci-Fi Channel, Discovery Channel, History Channel, and Fox News Channel. He has been featured on many television shows, including Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, Inside Editions, A Current Affair, and Creepy Canada. Gordon has been the focus of numerous national and international newspaper stories and magazine articles, some of which include the Pittsburgh Press, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Denver Post. He has been a guest on many national and international radio shows, including the popular show Coast to Coast. Gordon is also the producer of the award-winning 1998 video documentary Kecksburg, The Untold Story. He is the author of the books Really Mysterious Pennsylvania and Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO-Bigfoot Casebook. He has written numerous articles about UFOs and strange encounters, and many books and publications have included his research as well. Stan also writes a column for the quarterly magazine The Gate to Strange Phenomena. Since the late 1960s, Gordon has been lecturing to the public on the UFO subject, presenting illustrated lectures locally and nationally to social and professional groups, schools, colleges, libraries, and conferences. Among others, some of his lectures topics include a synopsis of the Kecksburg UFO crash, UFO and Bigfoot incidents, and the mysterious creature encounters. He was the keynote speaker at the first World UFO and Paranormal Expo in Denver, Colorado in 2004. Stan was a keynote speaker at the 2011 McMinnville, Oregon UFO Festival, speaker at the 2012 East Coast MUFON UFO Conference in Philadelphia, and the 2012 Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Stan is included in the 2013 TV series for Discovery Channel called Alien Mysteries, and he went to Canada in 2013 to do an interview with New Road Media for an upcoming series called Close Encounters. And that's a lot about Stan Gordon.
yeah, Stan's got quite a bio, and
he does
got a lot there. It really is. He's been around forever, and I've known about Stan, guy, when I even started when I started even getting into this back in the mid '70s. There were not a whole lot of people doing this type of thing.
No, and it was ballsy at that time.
No, I mean, and back then, it's funny. I wasn't really into the UFOs. Of course, I would. It interested me. Uh, I would read all kinds of crazy stuff that was available, like the George Adamski. He some of the stuff he had written, and but when it came to actual reports, Stan was putting stuff out back then, and that was he was kind of one of the only people other than some of the bigger names like Valet or some of the other ones that were actually putting this type of material out. So of course, that's where I started learning from Stan a long time ago.
Me too. 55 years, Lon. A 55-year career investigating the strange and unusual in the state of Pennsylvania and getting himself some recognition along the way. And I know Stan personally. He's a good friend, and when I go to some conferences occasionally, I'll have the opportunity to have dinner with him and his wife, who's such a sweet lady. And it's just, for me, it's an honor and a privilege to know him because Stan is such a down-to-earth guy, and he just has been somebody that's followed a passion for now 55 years. Started at the age of 10, or just about around the age I started following all this kind of stuff. So that seems to be like the catalyst age. Like you start to learn to reason and be interested in the strange and the spooky and the unknown, and it becomes less scary and more fascinating. So you start to explore things, and for some of us, it's been so far a lifetime of fun, and for Stan, it's definitely a lifetime of fun. He's been doing this for twice as long as I've been on planet Earth.
I think kind of started for me too. I went out and would be hunting at age 12. I'd be out there in the woods, and you never, so you'd see some things that would kind of get you thinking, especially if you'd be out there at nighttime snooping around. And it is kind of the age you start thinking about things. You start getting interested, and of course, when I got out of high school, that's when I really started going into it. But then again, back then, very few people were doing it, and it was almost like a taboo subject. It was like a pulp book subject at that time, and especially ghost hunting. That was kind of frowned upon, and I guess until people like Barry Taff and Barry Gordon and those out in Los Angeles got involved with the with the parapsychology and actually going into people's homes and trying to figure out what was going on. That's when it started coming to the forefront, and then it exploded, I guess from the mid-90s on. But it's how much longer it's got, to be as popular as it has been, I don't know.
Well, I hope it ends soon.
Well,
the popularity.
I think I think it's a two-edged sword, really. It's good it's out there that people are aware of it, but then again, everybody and their brother want to be a ghost hunter, and it kind of tends to not only take it into the absurdity to some point, but some of the stuff you read is just absolutely ridiculous. So, maybe it'll actually get to the point where it kind of whittles itself down to people that are just real serious about what they're doing, and it'll be, it won't be watered down as much as it is now.
Well, that's what I always hope, and I always kind of sound cantankerous, like the cantankerous old man, and I'm not even old yet. But the one thing that, it's not that there's so many people involved in it. It's just that it's so popular that everybody wants to be involved in it now. And when people finally realize that it's not as exciting as it's made to be out on TV, then they lose their edge, and then it was all for nothing.
Oh, yeah.
But for some of us that have been doing this for a long time, Lon, that we know it's boring most of the time, but it's a passionate pursuit that for some reason I think a part of us we just have to follow and be part of.
Well, a group of people, a group of friends will get together, start a group, start a paranormal group, start putting money into it, getting equipment, start advertising, um, expecting they're gonna rock the world, get themselves some some notoriety out of it, and it just doesn't happen that way. Of course, some people do. Unfortunately, there are a lot that do that really shouldn't. But anyway, that being said, then they'll do it for a year or two, and then they'll just fall by the wayside, and I see that happen all the time. So, and it's not only paranormal groups or ghost hunting groups or spirit groups. It's also cryptid groups as well.
Oh yeah, it happens.
Yeah, it's one of these things where you got to, I know when I was out in the field, you had to be out there, and you got to be out there consistently. You got to be out there expecting not to see anything, and you got to be vigilant, and that's just the name of the game. And it's kind of the same with what I do. I don't get reports all the time, and I got to be digging and digging here and there, and it's really good to have connections. It's good that you have people you can trust. That if you have a question like Stan, and I got to give Stan a lot of credit. When I need something, he can go right to him. Butch is the same way. Butch Witkowski. A lot of my associates, a lot of my colleagues, and I've always been grateful for that.
Definitely, some really good people that we have to touch with if we need that, kind of in the moment assistance. But Lon, I guess one last thing we have some time to talk about before we move on and actually bring Stan on the show. How about all this flack you've been receiving lately? Yeah,
you're talking about the Bushman, the Boyd Bushman flack.
Yeah, Boyd Bushman.
Yeah, well, Boyd Bushman's been around a while. Now, this guy, he used to be a senior scientist with Lockheed. And what happened was past August, or maybe a little before that, but anyway, he had done a deathbed, what they call a deathbed confession on video. And basically what he did, he went back and rehashed a lot of the things that he had actually presented before. He did a video 4 or 5 years ago with a lot of the same information, and for whatever reason, now that he got put out there right before he passed away, he received a whole lot of not a lot of scrutiny, and a lot of skeptics jumped on it. Quite frankly, a lot of what he said, and a lot of what he's been saying for the past 4 or 5 years, kind of rings true with some of the things that I've been privy to over those years as well. This guy, he was senior scientist with Lockheed Martin. He did this stuff for 40 years. He worked for Howard Hughes Aircraft, General Dynamics, Texas Instruments. He got 26 patents, some of which are still classified. A lot of these patents were for missile systems, smart bombs, and imaging systems, magnetic related technology, which I think is his biggest contribution. Impeccable credentials, and that he stated that he worked firsthand with alien visitors and technology that was located at Area 51. Now, I believe a lot of what the guy said. Now, people are saying, well, they got this guy before he died. He wanted to be well known for this and that. Well, the biggest thing is, the biggest criticism is of the this alien, the pictures of the aliens that he showed, and I suppose the similarities to a doll or plastic figure that was sold in Kmart's or other locations. I guess I would say that's fair game for criticism. The the images that he showed in the video had some age and wear to them. Now, this doll wasn't a mass marketed item, and from what I found out, it seemed to be initially manufactured and distributed in the 1960s. Now, that information was provided to me by a source who's a toy and juvenile items distributor. I went out and checked with a few people, and that's what I was told by one individual. Now, if that is the case, the only thing I can figure is, and this is just speculation, but the powers to be may have been responsible for this hidden in plain sight, a campaign to debunk disclosures. Now,
always possible.
There have been claims for several decades that, alien technology and design has been leaked to the film industry in an attempt to soften the blow in case there is a disclosure or, God forbid, an invasion, and that the general public, kind of doesn't freak out to the point where they're going to freak out anyway, but it's kind of being spoon-fed to them. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I have people tell me that are very big into UFOs and big into government, military. Let's put this way, behind the scenes stuff. Say that's actually true. So I don't know. It just could be, but I think the guys gave a lot of facts. There are some other videos if you go to YouTube and search Boyd Bushman. All these other older videos, especially the ones on magnetism, will come out. I think the guy was really involved with something, and I believe what he said.
Well, there you have it. Lon's official word on Boyd Bushman, and now you can quit threatening him. And
well, I'm telling you, some of the emails I got. I woke up that next morning after I posted that, and I forgot how many I said. Like 160 emails.
There's quite a few.
And I'd say half of them, that's like 80 emails were giving me a bunch of crap about I must be crazy or this and that, and I've never had that before. So there's a lot of people with some definite feelings about this type of thing. I don't know who these people were. Some of the letters, some of the emails were anonymous. There's nothing where I think it would be an official email from somebody who really knew what they were talking about. But, I struck a nerve, so it happens.
Well, folks, at any time you have questions, comments, concerns, you can always email them to us here at info@arcaneradio.com, and we do get them. In fact, we're starting to get emails from, believe it or not, around the world of folks wanting to know how they can listen to Arcane Radio. So we have a couple different options here for multi-platform listening, and as always, Lon and I prefer Stitcher Radio for you to go and listen to the latest episodes of Arcane Radio. Stitcher Radio, you go to your app store, either on Android or on iOS, your Apple device, or you can also go right to the radio website, StitcherRadio.com, and search for Arcane Radio and listen to the show via web or through the apps that that company provides you. Also, you can go right to our Podbean site, arcaneradio.podbean.com, where you can download and listen to our latest show right there on the webpage or through their different forms of downloading. And that's as simple as Lon and I can make it for you. So a couple different ways we have for you to listen and enjoy Arcane Radio. And I know lately some of our episodes have been infrequent, and I apologize for that. We're real people, and we also have real jobs that have to pay real bills so we can afford to have real lives. So sometimes they do come in sporadically, but be rest assured, Lon and I have not lost our flair or love for Arcane Radio or all of you, and more shows are coming. Just I ask that you be patient in between and send us your feedback. Again, arcaneinfo@arcaneradio.com, and make some suggestions for guests, and we'll do our best to make, again, the best show for you. And there's one more technical production piece. For now, the show, as it's mixed down, goes into 2-channel audio. And, Lon, you're familiar with this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're listening, you have to have both earphones in or listening to it on a stereo speaker system. So you'll hear Lon and I, or you're only going to have one-sided conversations, which sounds like fun, but it can be a little odd to listen to. So make sure you have both headphones in for now, and as soon as we get a fix for that, I'll put a notice up there and let everybody know that the audio issue is fixed. And we're not using a professional team right now. It's just old Fort Chop mixing it down and putting it out. So be patient with me. I'm a delicate flower.
Huh? Yeah, well, it'll get fixed.
That's right. But the show, Lon, the quality of the show is a lot better than anything we used to do on Blog Talk Radio. Not that I'm knocking that platform, but the quality is much better. Folks like our sound more, and we're just having fun doing this.
Oh yeah, this is something we don't have to do, but it's something we want to do. So
that's right, because you deserve the latest and greatest in the world of the paranormal. Lon, anything else before we stop here to bring Stan Gordon on the show?
No, I can't think of anything.
All right, folks, hang tight. We'll be back in a little bit with Stan Gordon. And folks, you're listening to Arcane Radio. Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, and our very special guest, Mr. Stan Gordon from the wonderful world, the crazy, strange world of Pennsylvania. Stan, welcome to Arcane Radio.
Oh, appreciate having me back on again, guys.
So, Stan, we know you've been following some strange creatures, but lately it's been flying creatures, flying cryptids in PA.
Yeah, I mean, this year's been steadily busy with a lot of the reports of UFOs and various cryptids, including some Bigfoot activity. But more recently, it's been that increase in giant flying cryptid reports. And, there's been a history of Thunderbird sightings in Pennsylvania going back for many, many years. But it seems, just from the top of my head, it seems maybe around the year 2000 began to see a little more steady flow of reports coming in. And but more recently, especially this past September, there was some interesting little surge of reports. And there have been a number of other sightings in the past few months as well. So it seems as though we're getting more and more people calling in about seeing these giant birds.
Yeah, you contacted me a couple of weeks ago and were asking me about, if I've been any of these sightings been coming across, on my desk, and I hadn't been getting any. So I was kind of interested to see what you had. So I looked, last week I posted what you had posted on your website, and it's pretty amazing, some of the sightings. So why don't you go through some of these and let us know what's been going on.
Yeah, well, if you want to go back a little bit, back a few years ago, again, a lot of reports of these things being seen. And very commonly, when people first see these things, their first thought is they're seeing a small aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And they begin to see that it's flapping its wings, and they realize this is not an aircraft, but it's a very huge bird. And there were many, many instances. Back in May of 2008, on Route 43 down in Washington County, PA, in the afternoon, apparently on this busy highway, people had seen this huge, dark, bat-like creature with a leathery skin, and it came down to within 20 feet of some of the cars, and reportedly people were stopping their cars on this busy road and pulling off to see this thing. And there was a fellow down there was seen by people who was apparently taking photographs of it, but whoever that fellow is, he's never come forward. And so, who's to say? And then many reports since that time, May 17th of 2013, down in Derry Township again. Derry might ring a bell, because it's that little community along the Chestnut Ridge in Westmoreland County, which for whatever reason, almost year after year, produces a lot of Bigfoot activity around that general area historically, Thunderbirds, UFO sightings, other weird events. But that Chestnut Ridge, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it's 100 miles long, and it stretches from Preston County, West Virginia, through Westmoreland, Fayette, Indiana County in southwest PA. That area along that ridge is yearly active with all kind of phenomena, from cryptid reports to UFOs to other type of paranormal events. It just goes on and on every year. So May 17th of 2013, this fellow I recall was just coming home from a fishing trip, was on his motorcycle, and he came around a bend, and about 50 feet in front of him, about 8 to 10 feet above the road, there's this huge, dark, monstrous bird. He said it was dark, short-necked, and a long tail, but he said that thing easily had a wingspan of 20 feet.
Mm.
And he said it just took a matter of seconds to speed up to get up to the area towards the woods where it was disappearing to, and it was completely gone. And he said, I just can't really understand why I couldn't see it further, where it could have gone to at that close range and being in daylight. So there's a lot of weird stuff. And then again, you know, we have these series of events of all places here in South Greensburg, Pennsylvania, a populated area on a major road, Route 119, and back in September of 2001, fellow's outside walking, and he hears the sound, attracts him, look up. He said it sounded like flags flapping in a thunderstorm, to see this huge, kind of dark, maybe grayish brown or black bird with a 10 to 15-foot wingspan, 50 to 60 feet above the trucks and the cars on the road, and it's flying above, and then it turns and goes down the road and comes down in this big old tree, and he said you can see the branches of this thing just bending and bending from the huge amount of weight from it, and then it finally accelerates and goes off into the woods. And then in August of 2010, maybe probably within a half mile there, 4 people are having a barbecue, and they're sitting out the back porch, and all of a sudden they hear this loud whooshing, swooshing sound to look up, and 40 feet above their head is this monstrous bird with the beak looking down at them. And it takes a couple big flaps of its wing, and it's gone in seconds down the road over the woods. And then to make it even stranger, January of 2013 would have been over that general area where that bird was flying towards. We had just had a big snowstorm a couple days before. So these 2 women and a little boy decided to take a walk because it was beautiful out there. There's woods, there's trees, but the trees are not thick, so you could easily see. Well, they're walking through this area. The little boy's not paying attention. All of a sudden, the 2 women yell out loud, "Did you see the size of that huge bird?" And they described him. It was described that they saw this huge bird with this massive wingspan open up on the ground. So it's 20 to 25 feet away from them. There's fresh snow on the ground. It walks behind the trees. They run over immediately to try to see it. It's not there. There's deer tracks. There's no other tracks. There's no place for this thing to fly off to. They would have seen it fly off because the trees were not thick. Like, where did it go? So it adds more and more to the mystery. And then there's been other reports since then. But in the last year, this is down off of Route 30 East. This is only several miles from Greensburg. This is a little town of Jeanette, PA. And that particular afternoon on March 25th, this fellow was taking a walk, and he happened to look up in the sky. Now, he, like so many around here, are really familiar with seeing small aircraft because we have a lot of small landing strips and major airports around this area, so you see them all the time. So he looks up in the sky towards the east, kind of cloudy, and he thought he saw what would look like a Piper Cub. But as he's looking at this thing, he realizes this thing is moving too fast, too smooth, and the wings are turned up at the end. And then he realizes this dark object was not an aircraft, but appeared to be a huge bird. And he watches gliding towards the west and brushed the clouds, and he never saw it flap its wings. And he said he would estimate from seeing aircraft all the time, this thing easily had about a 15-foot wingspan. He ran into his house to get binoculars. When he came out, it was gliding off in the distance. And then July 21st, up in Indiana County, now this guy I talked to, and he was really reluctant to call me. He said he went through all his bird books for at least a couple of days before he even called in. He said, because he has been, since a kid, he has been a bird watcher. That's one of his hobbies. He knows the birds of Pennsylvania. And he was just mystified of what he saw on the afternoon of July 21st this year. He was in a rural area of Indiana County, and all of a sudden he saw what he thought was a low-flying aircraft. Then he noticed the wings were flapping very slowly, and he realized that this is unlike any bird he had ever seen. It was dark, maybe brown in color. He was kind of a broad semicircular tail in a rump area, and this guy's familiar with all the larger birds of Pennsylvania. And he said it dwarfed that of an eagle, and he estimated the wingspan would easily have been at least 12 foot in length. So there's another one. Now, an interesting thing is, and I've talked to you about this on shows in the past, but I found many years ago, we're talking 30, 40 years ago, that I began to see some type of a pattern in that a lot of close-range, low-level UFO sightings and a lot of close cryptid accounts, incidents would happen in the vicinity of energy sources.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of sightings around like power plants, high-tension power lines, gas wells, gas lines, radio transmission towers, water, railroad tracks, things like that. And that particular incident happened only, I believe it was about a mile and a half or so from the Homer City Power Station, which has had a long history of UFO incidents up there from the time they were going in the late 60s up through the present. And then over to Scottsdale on August 24th, 1:15 in the afternoon, and you guys know Roger Marsh, and I know he's published this and talked about it, and we talked about it, and he was moving some furniture that day. When they looked up, he said to see the biggest monstrous bird he had ever seen, a massive wingspan making circles right over the area, and he was able to see the beak and the body and the wings, and this thing was just massive. And reportedly, 2 men were overheard that day in a local convenience store saying that they had seen a huge thunderbird-like creature in the area earlier that day. Then we get a little closer to what I had called you about. And actually, interestingly, this series of events, September, for whatever reason, was unusually active in the state with a UFO activity and with some cryptid reports. In fact, the interesting thing is the day before I got the call on the Thunderbird, I got a report of a Black Panther sighting not far from that same area. So this is now September 23rd, and this guy is outside of Jeanette, and he's standing there in the afternoon, and he hears this sound, a very, very strange sound that attracted him to look up in the sky, and he said it was very loud, and he said it was kind of like a rah, rah, rah sound. And he said, it's really hard for me to explain, but he said, if dinosaurs were living today, I would think they would make a sound something like this. And he looked up to see this gigantic, and he said it was very black, a very, very black-colored bird, about 200 feet off the ground. And he said this thing, the body was about 6 feet or more in length from head to tail, but the wingspan was easily 12 feet or more in width. And he was a little hesitant to talk about it, but he said this thing looked more like a prehistoric bird than any other bird he's ever seen. And then he went on to tell me, he said that it had no feathers on it, but it was skin-like that of a giant bat, which, we've heard these reports in the past from other people as well. And then the next day, not far from there, only a few miles away over the little community of Penn, 2 people saw that afternoon what appeared to be a huge bird following a helicopter. And they said this thing got very close to the helicopter, and they said at times it seemed to be even bigger in size at the same distance than the helicopter was. And they watched it fly around the area, and it got pretty close to it, and then it flew out over a group of trees and disappeared. But the one woman I talked to, and she drew me a sketch of it, she said, I've seen them on TV, but she said, I never thought I'd ever live to see a dragon. And she said, that's the only way I can describe the way the wings were and the way the wings flapped, that huge bird that was behind the helicopter looked like a dragon. And then September 24th, which is that same day, I get a call from another fella who lived a few miles from there, down near Irwin or North Huntington. He was a big fella. He was going to work that night, and he parked in a pretty heavily wooded area. And he said he's going over to his car, which he does all the time, and he heard about 50 to 80 feet away, he estimated, very loud noises, like something very big was snapping tree limbs. And then he heard this really loud, shrill sound, he said, that really scared the heck out of him. And the sound he made to me was very similar to what that fellow told me 2 days before, right down the road, of what that giant bird sounded like, that rah, rah, rah sound. So I went out with another investigator. We searched through that wooded area, really couldn't find any trace of anything, but the guy was legitimately frightened, and something scared him pretty badly. And then I get a report October 4th. Now, this is almost between the border of Indiana County and Westmoreland, up near New Florence, which, again, it's within about 2 miles from the power station in New Florence, where this fellow that afternoon, and this guy's lived in the woods all his life, turkey vultures, no blue herons, and he said he was startled by this huge bird that was no more than maybe about 15 feet over the top of his vehicle when he first saw it. It was black, maybe extremely dark brown. He said it had an elongated neck similar to a goose, and it was covered with feathers, and the beak looked similar to a raptor. He was not certain, but he thought the beak was light brown in color, and he said it easily had a 12-foot wingspan. He couldn't hear any sound, but he thought that may have been from the engine drowning out the noise. And so anyhow, that's what we've been getting. And, historically, we may file these strange giant bird reports under the term a thunderbird, but the reports, while some are similar, some are different. And some of them are just very, very massive, big, oversized birds with massive wingspans. Others describe something that looks more leathery, like a huge giant bat. Others have talked to me and said what they saw they felt looked more prehistoric, like a pterodactyl or a teratorn. More than one person in the last few years has mentioned the word dragon, that what they saw looked like a dragon. And some have over the years even reluctantly brought up gargoyle. So there's differences, yet similarities in different reports over the years. And, we talked about this before, whether we're talking about these huge flying cryptids or Bigfoot or the Black Panther reports we get or a whole variety of other cryptids that we look into, where do they come from and where do they go? Sometimes there's some physical evidence, and, credible people are seeing them. 99% of these people want no publicity. So what are we dealing with is the big question.
Well, see, that's what fascinates me the most, is they just seem to show up, but the biggest thing is, where in the hell they go to, because they just seem to vanish. And, you talked about the one behind the tree, and, it's just like other cryptids that we get reports on. These things just seem to disappear.
Yeah. And
is it this interdimensional thing that we've always talked about? I mean, does it apply to all of them, all cryptids? Are these all these creatures coming from another plane somewhere? I mean, it makes you think. But then again, they seem to come back where other people are seeing them.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, over the years it happened. And, just like the Black Panther reports. So the Black Panther reports are very intriguing in Pennsylvania. They're not an animal that has ever scientifically existed in this part of the world. Generally what people describe as a black jaguar or a black leopard. But, of course, they've never existed scientifically in this part of the world, but they've been seen for multitudes of years. There are multitudes of reports of them. I mean, I've interviewed hunters the last couple of years in daylight that within 30 feet of them. And, some of these cases are extremely detailed, very interesting. By the way, back in March of 1983, in a heavily populated suburb of Pittsburgh, there was a massive search for a Black Panther. And it was a really interesting, and it actually made big news in the papers, believe it or not, down there. Because, the first thing we check when people get reported these things is, has one of these animals escaped from a zoo or a carnival? First of all, there's not a lot of them around. Secondly, it's very rare these things ever escape. And when they do, generally you hear about it and you can figure it out pretty well. But that's never been the case. And in this particular case, it was interesting because this happened in a rural area, rather in a suburb of Pittsburgh, where there was quite a lot of people around. It was at a large car dealership where there was a fence that separated this large wooded area from the company there. And this thing had dived over the fence where a mechanic was working on a car. He was replacing a headlight in the car at 9:30 that morning. And he hears this loud thump, and there's this huge Black Panther that leaped over the fender and hood of the car, and it has a dead animal in its mouth, and it's looking at him. And he said the animal itself had a body at least 3.5 feet long, and the tail was about 4 feet long, and it was beautiful, solid black, and the ears were upright, and he could smell this terrible stench like rotten urine, and he could hear like very deep, heavy breathing sounds from it, and the thing turned around, took another jump, and went back over the woods. Well, apparently a short time later, more than one person saw a big one and a little one together, so they notified the police. Well, that led to a massive search by the Pittsburgh police and the animal control officers had tranquilizer guns, and of course they never found it. And interestingly, historically, the area is called Panther Hollow. Now, one of the guys in my research group at the time, he was a special forces guy. He was an experienced professional tracker. He got out there and he tracked it for quite a distance and lost track of it. But the whole thing is the same thing. Where do they come from? Where do they go? And then to add to the mystery, and you may have heard this over the years in other cases, there have been instances where Bigfoot has been seen accompanied by what is described as a black panther. I don't know if you've ever had cases like that. Or in some cases, like we had an incident back in the 80s where we had an outbreak of Bigfoot sightings here in Westmoreland County, and then people began to report black panther sightings in the same area. So there's a lot more to this mystery than we understand.
I totally agree with both you guys here. I've been in that area in Derry.
Now, you told me you had a case in Massachusetts.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of details right for it, but it happened early October this year. And this guy was riding down the road. I interviewed him. Sounds very, very credible. And apparently this thing was, what I'm remembering, he thought at first it was a big bird like an eagle, but then it dropped down feet first towards the ground. And it was only about 30 feet away from him. But he estimated this thing stood like 4 to 5 feet tall, as I recall. And I'm trying to remember a little bit. It was dark in color, and it had he described it as like a gigantic bat with a tail. And so it was a very, very unusual. He was very, very shook up by it. He said he didn't stop to get a picture and he regrets it, but he was almost in shock when he saw it. And he had contacted me after hearing some of the other research I've been doing. But these things are going on all over the country, which you know about in other parts of the world. And it's the same thing. We don't have anything like that scientifically today. And where do they come from? Where do they go?
Well, that's just it. Where they go. And now I got this sighting that was sent to me last week from near area, and actually Robin Swope got a hold of me and said that area around 6 Mile Creek Park, where this thing was supposed to be seen at, has had other sightings before. Now, I don't know what to make of this photo. Now you saw it, Stan. Does this kind of sync up with some of the other sightings you've been getting?
Yeah, it's interesting, and the picture is interesting, but there's a lot of questions. Need a lot more investigation on the photograph. You and I see a lot of odd pictures come in all the time. I get them quite often, and you got to be really careful today. With the technology out there, plus the fact that, and I've had experiences myself just by sheer coincidence and problems with my digital camera taking photographs, which I could easily submit, for example, as UFO pictures, and people think, "Wow, they look really great," and it's nothing but the way the electronics when the digital cameras work. That under certain conditions, under the wrong lighting, under the wrong focusing, they can create some very, very weird effects.
Right.
So you can't just go by that. But another thing is interesting, and I believe you've had a couple cases like this, where people have seen flying cryptids that appear to have a glow to them. They're luminous. And they're not that common, but have you not had some cases like that?
Mm-hmm.
And
I've had these. I've had these supposedly large flying Mothman-like creatures, these flying humanoids, and there'd be either an orange or red luminescence near the head area, and now there have been others where they've seen this luminescence, but they couldn't quite pinpoint what part of the body it was coming from.
Yeah. Well, back in March 18th of 2012, and if you go back through my website, you can find some of these older reports. But this, again, is up in Fayette County. I'm sure we already mentioned it once. Fayette County is among those counties along the Chestnut Ridge, where year after year there's a long history. And some of the strangest, most interesting Bigfoot encounters have been happening for years and years up in Fayette County. So this incident happened March 18th of 2012 in the southern part of Fayette County. Is an area that has a lot of history of Bigfoot sightings and other weird stuff. But this particular evening, this fellow was walking his dog about 11:45 at night. He's in the front yard when he hears this whooshing sound again coming from above him, and he looks up at about 55 feet away. He sees what he describes as a dragon. And he says this flying creature passes over in an automatic dusk-to-dawn light, and he gets a good look at this thing. He said the body's about 22 feet long, and the wingspan's about 18 feet wide, and it looked to be shiny with almost reflective body with no scales. And the color was kind of a dark brown, red, kind of an auburn brown. At the end tips of the wings appeared to be talon-like fingers, about 3 to 4. The arms of the wing structure appeared muscular. The wings were quite thick, not like skin. Appeared to be a rear fin on both sides of the body, and the creature displayed an arrowhead-shaped tail. He also said it appeared to have 2 extended rear legs. The creature itself had a cone shape around the head and stopped flat on the base of the neck. But the oddest feature was, he said, that around the mouth and eyes, it was illuminated with a very ominous orange glow. And as it flew over the trees down towards the bottom of the yard, he could hear this deep, throaty sound, he said, similar to a foghorn on a boat. And he saw this thing, the total observation about 20 seconds. So just another one of those strange stories.
You gentlemen hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, sorry guys, I had a problem with my microphone. As I was saying earlier, Stan, I've been to your neck of the woods. I've been up in Derry. I've been in the Chestnut Ridge, and it's a different place. There's a lot of strange, unusual happenings up there. Why do you think Derry, the Chestnut Ridge, is such an active area?
You know, I wish I had that answer. You know, going back to the 73 and 74, we had that massive, weird UFO-Bigfoot outbreak, and a lot of activity was concentrated around that area, and we spent many days and nights investigating, spending nights out, searching for evidence, searching for the creatures, and we looked for that information ever since. And I've never been able to find anything outstanding that would tell us why. You know, you have these areas around the country where you have just more activity than normal. And, I mean, there's an inactive earthquake fault going through the ridge, but I don't see any really connection there. But I just don't have the answer for it. I wish we did. You know, there are people who live on top of that ridge, people reporting all kind of other phenomena, and we've been finding in recent years, I'm getting reports of other odd phenomena that you wouldn't even think about that people have been relating, which might be somehow associated with some of these things. It's just so many strange, and people claim they have seen what they would call maybe vortexes up on top of the ridge over the years. So it might be another clue of, is there some type of pathway or entryway for various phenomena to come in and out of our physical reality? And is there something special about certain areas where this type of event can exist? We just don't know.
One of the things I found pretty funny when I was up there on the ridge, Stan, was we were up there on a Bigfoot investigation, and we were talking about vocalizations, and these people had stopped us along the way up to the top of the ridge. And we were asking them, you guys heard anything strange? They're like, oh, yeah, we hear this stuff all the time. It was just so funny how comfortable they were with that.
Oh, yeah. And you know, I mean, a lot of people will contact me along, and most of them still want no publicity, but when you're out in events, I mean, I do a lot of lectures, and, you know, I've been trying to educate the public on these matters since the late 60s. And everywhere I go, every year, including in recent weeks and months, local people come up and tell me of their experiences, even though they don't want it publicly known who they are. But when you're out there talking to these people, it's almost like a common thing that they know about these things, and it's been going on for years and years.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. It's just like something that's been going on they know about, that kind of surprises other people haven't said something about it. And, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Well, I kind of understand their position. Juan, and about, just a couple weeks ago, it marked 55 years I've been doing this research now.
Mm.
And still have never personally seen a UFO or a Bigfoot or other cryptid. I've seen a lot of evidence, but I've never personally seen one. And there's so many people that I run into that, would never believe it until they see something for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so many of the witnesses I run into are people who years and years would laugh at other people or laugh at their friends who were hunters who would see things in the woods until they had their own personal experience. And many of them, it's a life-changing event for them because they can't handle the fact that they saw something out there that just shouldn't exist.
Well, that's just it, and I can understand that, and it's life-changing, and you never forget about it, and it's something that sticks with you, and and the thought about it will just come back to you at any time. And, I still question myself about it. The Bigfoot sighting or whatever this thing was down in Sykesville, I still question myself about it. What was this? Was it a Bigfoot? Was it some type of human? But, I know it wasn't. I just don't know what exactly it was.
Yeah. But what's intriguing about your story, as I recall, was the fact that it appeared as though that there was an official response in the area very quickly after you had your sighting.
Well, you know what? I have been doing some investigating about that since the TV show, and from what I have gathered, this thing may have been seen a couple hours before my sighting.
That would make sense.
And it was up, and I think the sighting was up near Marriottsville, which is downstream from Sykesville. And I think they were already out looking for it because that's the only explanation. Because there's no way they could have got onto it that quick.
Right, I agree with that. Yeah. And, I've had other similar cases over the years, going back to the events of 1973 and talking about, all these different cryptids. When I got involved with all this investigation of Bigfoot, I started this in 1959. Right. And I got out in the field after the Kecksburg incident in 1965. So I've been out in the field doing first-hand investigations in 1965, and I worked on thousands and thousands of cases of all kind of phenomena here in Pennsylvania from that time up to the present. And I've always taken an open-minded attitude as to what we might be dealing with. And, I've always found that when you look into any of these cases, many of them seem very odd or unusual initially, but when you investigate them, most of them turn to be either natural or man-made origin. There's explanations, but there are incidents that go on year after year. Credible people are seeing them. You've got physical evidence in some cases. Some of these cases you cannot easily dismiss. Something is going on out there. But with Bigfoot, I started looking at Bigfoot back in the early days, and there had been a history of Bigfoot in Pennsylvania going back to the Native Americans and the newspaper accounts of the 1800s. The earliest first-hand account of a person I've interviewed in Pennsylvania was back in Fayette County, again up in Indian Head, goes back to 1931. And so these things have been seen for a long time. I had always felt and always believed that if Bigfoot was real, and I felt from interviewing eyewitnesses, and now I've interviewed hundreds of alleged Bigfoot witnesses from Pennsylvania, that they're probably some type of unknown zoological creature. Until those events that unfolded in 1973, and some of the cases that I still continue to hear from the public, from not just in Pennsylvania but around the country, that suggests more and more that there's much more to this mystery, and we may be dealing with something, for a better term, is interdimensional, that whatever we're dealing with, it appears physically solid under certain conditions, leaves physical evidence, and then it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not been involved in that series of events in 73 and 74, I would never be able to accept that. But
well, I tell you, it seems like that was around the time that was the watershed moment, basically. I'm going over what you investigated back then. It seems since that time there have been some similar type sightings where people have noticed other types of anomalies, where Bigfoot sightings have been, or if UFOs have been. It seems like it's tied somewhat together, and yeah, I agree with you. And you and I even mentioned the last time we talked that, but the regular Bigfoot hunter now is starting to open their mind up to this as well.
Oh,
there's
no doubt. And since my book came out, Silent Invasion, and a lot of discussion we've had out there publicly about this, I'm seeing quite an interest in people deeply involved in the Bigfoot field who are now beginning to be a little more open-minded. They're beginning to ask the same questions I have for years, like, if these creatures have been around for so long, something similar has been seen throughout the world, and yet we have hardly any physical evidence of no bodies, it just doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And when you looked at some of the cases that we had in 73, 74, that were extremely well documented because our teams were on the scene within minutes to hours after they occurred, and I surely wasn't looking for those type of cases to show up. That's not what I was looking. We were out there gathering data, documenting the information, and that's where the evidence began to lead us. Now, I keep an open mind to all possibilities with Bigfoot and other cryptids, but there's definitely some aspects of this that are extremely very high strangeness cases. Mm-hmm. And I continue to hear these reports. I mean, for example, early winter of this year, when they were having those big snowstorms down east, there was a series of Bigfoot sightings going on down in a mountainous area down in eastern Pennsylvania. And one person I talked to, they lived up on top of a mountain. There had been some Bigfoot activity there. They got this huge snow. I think it was like a foot and a half of snow at the time. And it was in the news about all the snow down there. And the friend had his huge dog with her. And I believe she had the dog for probably 7 or 8 years. And the only time she ever saw that dog cower was when she was down there. She was down there. They heard a noise. It was in the evening. Heard a noise in front of her. The dog was behind her growling and shaking. And her beam of light hit this huge 7 to 8 foot tall hairy creature taking huge strides through the snow. Well, apparently the next morning there's this huge series of tracks in the snow that just suddenly stopped and disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the kind of stuff that I was coming up with in the summer, where we would have trails of tracks under all type of ground conditions. And you got to remember, a lot of the people I was working with back in those days, and my teams, they were scientists and engineers and research people, and former military intelligence people, police officers, and anthropologists. These were people who knew how to investigate. And, a lot of these guys came in with my investigations very skeptical, and many of them, after years of research, realized that, the pattern's there, the evidence is there, something is going on here. You cannot dismiss all this. And the cases we came up with suggested that there's more to this. And, we had some of those cases that were coming in from widespread areas of the state where we had UFOs and Bigfoots seen together at the same time and place. But before that, we began to see a pattern where we would have, for example, a UFO sighting in a certain area, then within minutes to hours, days later, we would have a Bigfoot sighting, or vice versa. UFO sighting and Bigfoot, and UFO, and then some together. And some of those cases were amazing. And there were some of those cases which highly suggested that whatever this creature or creatures were, we have to say creatures, because of some of those cases, we had more than one creature seen together at the same time. And those cases suggested we are dealing with something that was other than a flesh and blood animal.
Mm-hmm. Well, J.C. Johnson out in New Mexico, he's been getting these track lines now recently, where they just suddenly end. And it's like, like where in the hell are these things going to?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And, these reports are much more common. When I started publishing some of this information back in the 70s after this outbreak, and back then there was a tremendous more areas of ridicule than there is today.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was in contact with many key researchers back in the 70s and 80s from many countries in the United States. And so many of these researchers said, look, we've heard the same thing. We have the same thing going on out here. We've had the UFOs and the Bigfoot seen together. Some areas out in the western states, you had cattle mutilations, Bigfoot, UFOs, other paranormal stuff going on. It was going on all over the world. But they were telling me, you know what, we're reluctant to publish it because I'm afraid of being laughed at by my colleagues. and there's not enough information to go on, and, it may be much more common than we realize out there. And these reports still keep coming in. Very few Bigfoot reports have any association with a UFO sighting, and vice versa. But there is that percentage of cases that do. And one thing, let me make it plainly clear, because I think a lot of people out there maybe are a little confused with what I'm saying. First of all, let's make this clear. When we're talking about an unexplained UFO sighting, after you eliminate everything you can explain all the misidentifications, you got that percentage of UFO reports you cannot easily dismiss. I felt for years that there's probably more than one origin for the unknown category. Maybe a small percentage, maybe they are extraterrestrial, maybe some are unknown natural phenomena. I think more and more, for a better term, we're dealing with some phenomena that's interdimensional in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it has an energy connection to it. And, so the point I'm trying to make is I'm not saying that extraterrestrials are landing and Bigfoot are ETs. I'm saying there's some association there. I don't know what, if any, direct connection exists between the two. I mean, maybe whatever that UFO intelligence is, it's interested in Bigfoot or vice versa. Maybe somehow that this phenomena and the other cryptids may originate from the same stimulus. We just don't understand yet.
Well, the extraterrestrial theory has kind of been waning on me for years anyway. The more and more I hear from people that, come forward with abduction cases or come forward with contact cases, it just seems to me that we're dealing with something that's more Earth-based and that moves interdimensionally here from Earth. It actually comes from Earth, if it's underground or someplace where it's hidden, or it's in another dimension beside our plane, but it's moving in and out, but it's just not necessarily coming from another planet.
Right, and that's what I want to express. I don't have the answers. I don't know what it all means, but there's something happening out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And remember, Lon, we talked a while back that something I was noticing in some of the cryptid reports, and I think you had mentioned you have seen some of these cases where people had encountered cryptids at extremely close range. So we're talking within feet in some cases. Mm-hmm. And the thing that was so interesting that the little detail came up in some cases to me from the witness was that the creature, upon seeing that the witness had observed them, appeared to be startled that they could be seen. The creature appeared to be upset when it realized it was being observed by a human.
Yeah,
and I
brought
think
that up
that
to
may
me.
well be a key to a part of this phenomena.
Yeah, you brought that up the last time I talked to you, and I was really fascinated by that. But you're right, because I have been receiving more reports to where the actual witness would say that it was a Bigfoot or whatever it was, seemed to notice that they were being watched.
Yes.
And they reacted to it. So, that's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. One of the one of the first cases that turned up at least that stuck out in my mind, was a fellow I'd interviewed from nearby West Virginia. It happened back in the fall 2007. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. This guy's driving down a 2-lane road outside of Clendenin, West Virginia, and he had to hit his brakes really hard because there's this giant bird only a few yards ahead with a dead animal in its mouth blocking the road. Mm-hmm. And he said this thing easily was at least 4 feet tall because the head of it extended up above the roof line of his car. And he gave a very detailed description. He said it was covered with dark brown or black feathers, neck was long and crooked, beak was dark, and the eyes were dark in color. And the legs were covered in feathers, the feet were bare, and he went on to give a really, really detailed account. But he went on to describe how as he's watching this thing, he said that they each were looking at each other, and it looked shocked that it apparently that he could see it. And when the bird became startled, it pulled its head back to stare at the driver, and then it ran from the car as if it was trying to fly off. in an awkward manner. It was jumping from one foot to the other in a hopping manner, flapping its wings to try to get off the ground. It was so big, it was having a heck of a time trying to get off the ground, but it finally did. And he said he's watching the thing. He said the most amazing thing was this monstrous wingspan. And he said the wingtips, you could see the ends of them on each side of the road, and it was stirring up the dust and the gravel. And when it flew off, he watched it real clearly. He went back the next day to measure the width of that roadway. It was 21 feet across.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's a big set of wings.
That's big.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you talk about that, it makes you wonder why. Is it possible that these creatures or whatever they are coming into our dimension accidentally?
Yeah, that's a possibility too.
Are they coming in for some reason? Are all these so many reports that have been coming out? Is there something changing the dynamic to where they are coming into this plane or this dimension accidentally, and they're realizing that they are, or it's something that's hasn't happened to them before?
Yeah, it's like I said, so many questions and not enough answers. We just don't know.
Yeah,
but
that's
it
true.
appears as though that there has been, an increase in these type of reports.
Mm-hmm.
And the last few years, of course, we've had some very interesting cryptid reports, especially since 2011. You recall that case we had of that leathery 8-foot-tall creature with the wings tucked in its side up north of Pittsburgh, up in Butler County.
Yeah.
That apparently there were several people saw that thing. And 2011 had some really odd cases here in Pennsylvania. And, of course, we still get occasional Bigfoot reports or other entities that appear to have self-luminescent glowing eyes. We just had this case down near West Newton, PA, May 17th of this year. So West Newton and Westmoreland County has a lot of history of Bigfoot activity. One of the first cases I looked into was late 60s, probably about 66 or 67, where people had seen a very large hair-covered creature with dirty white hair in the woods down there, and they had found some tracks. That was one of the first cases I looked into. But in May of this year, a fellow and his teenage daughter were driving down the road, back around 11 o'clock, and they noticed off to the right what appeared to be a person stooped down on the side of the road, and as they got closer, it stood up, and it walked down right in front of the car, and the guy had to swerve into the left lane to miss hitting what he thought was a person, then realized that this thing was very large, covered with long, dark black fur, appeared to be black fur all over the body, and the eyes were self-luminescent and glowing. And his daughter started screaming, and he went down the road a little. He told me, he said, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I could still see it standing in the middle of the road looking at me as I'm riding down, and he said, I could still see the glowing eyes. So he said it wasn't a reflection off the headlights, for example. And in so many of these cases, there's no reflective light. There's no moon. There's no lights in the area. So these seem to be very intense, very brilliant self-illumination cases we have in the reports that we have. I had one incident years ago of two hunters, and that, in fact, they made an official report on this, and I got it. They were out hunting down near Irwin, I believe it was Irwin, North Huntington, and they saw this creature, I believe like 20, 30 feet away. It wasn't very far away, but interestingly, they could see it very easily where it was standing, and when it would turn its head, the eye color would change from bright red to bright green.
Wow.
Just strange stuff.
Well, I can attest to the eye color or luminescence because, the 88, I had that thing I call the Conewaga Phantom, and that thing definitely had eyes that illuminated. And, so I'll attest to that myself. That does happen. And, I mean, it's been seen. So, but you do hear it a lot, it's something about those eyes. They're, and it's just not one type of being. It's a numerous amount of these anomalies that have a luminescence about them. And, it is. It's consistent. So, oh my.
So
Well, it never stops. You know, people are always seeing things, and it's just a continuous phenomena. The UFO reports coming in. I mean, there's been a lot of UFO activity in the last few years. We've had amazing cases of UFOs. Probably one of the best cases I've had more recent years was June 1st of 2013 on a major highway in North Huntington Township. We brought that name up a couple times because of some of the other stuff that's going on around there more recently. But a woman who did not believe in UFOs and her 3-year-old child had just come out of a convenience store around 10 o'clock at night, and they made a left onto Route 30 eastbound, and she just went up the road a short ways, and suddenly she had to almost stop in the middle of the road. Here's this huge metallic rectangular object about 60 feet above the highway, taking up all 4 lanes. It made no sound. The lighting on it, and she drew me a sketch. It's on my website, and the coloring, the lighting on it was unlike navigational lighting. It made no sound. Her 3-year-old baby yells, "Mommy, flying iPad in the sky." And she had to pass underneath the object. She was on her cell phone. As she passed underneath the object, the digital displays on her dash in her car all went out. Her digital clock went out. Her FM radio station, she was went off the air. She lost her cell phone signal. And she tried to take a picture, and this has come up in the past too. She tried to take a picture with her iPhone, and it wouldn't let her go into the photo mode. And as she's driving down the road, all the electronics come back on. And I talked to her recently, and she said, you know what? Since that night, my car, which was relatively new, has not operated properly. It's been in and out of the shop many times, and they can't find it. And so that's interesting. That was one of the more classic kind of cases. You don't hear about those as often as we did back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, that seemed to happen more. Yeah, that seemed to happen more back then. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something I wanted to ask you, and I never thought about it, but I wanted to get your take on this Todd Seas incident. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with it. I know you are familiar with it, so with respect, that there was supposedly some UFO sighting attached to it. What do you think about it?
Well, you know, it was an unfortunate situation with me. The day it happened, my stepson was involved in a serious head-on collision, and he was in a pretty bad shape. So for weeks, I was tied up in the hospital. Okay. So I couldn't get involved in it. By the time I got out and I knew about it, I knew others had already pursued it, and I just let others who were already involved get involved in it because I knew I was going to be tied up here. Yeah. So I only got to read what I've seen out there, and of course there's a lot of controversy. It's interesting. You know, I'm not sure what happened there. I think we need a lot more data and more evidence to really be sure, because there could be more than one explanation for it. But it's definitely interesting. It's not the kind of case that has typically shown up. You know, I mean, there have been a few oddball cases somewhat similar, especially from South America, going back to the 60s.
Right.
But it's not something that you saw as a part of a pattern of incidents, you know, with UFO cases over the years. But who's to say? I mean, who's to say it couldn't happen? Something happened there. The question is, what was it?
It's a distinct case.
Yeah.
Basically because there was a body. You know, somebody died.
Yeah.
And if it was a UFO, if it was alien involvement, a human was involved and died because of it. Now, I'm not saying that well, I probably am saying that, you know, there have been abductions where people, I believe people just never showed back up. Now, you know, I think that people have disappeared for good for whatever reason, and, you know, but the fact that Todd C's body ended up was found 36 hours later makes it absolutely unique. Now, I'm not going to come out and say that he was absolutely abducted, but the circumstances are very strange. And it was also done at a power line. It was at a power line, you know, where it actually occurred, and where the two witnesses supposedly saw his body or him being drawn up into a light beam into this craft.
Yeah.
Now, who knows? God,
that's actually,
I still can't
it's very intriguing. It's very interesting, you know, and like I said, somebody out there probably knows a lot more than they're saying about it. And, you know, like I said, like so many of the very oddball cases, I ran into many, many high strangeness cases over the years in Pennsylvania that would fall into that category. And unfortunately, you know, I wasn't able to get involved in it at the time. I wish I had. But I think a lot of people have been doing, well, not, but a few of you guys have been out there doing some research on it. And there may well be other people out there that know something.
Well, it is frustrating. We've been trying to hit a lot of different channels, and you know, a lot of it has been suppressed, and it's obvious.
Yeah.
So
well, you know, over the years, and again, a lot of this from memory, but going back especially 70s to 80s, there were significant incidents in Pennsylvania. And some of these cases suggested that there had been some government involvement, and the public didn't hear a lot of the details about what really had taken place. We ran into a number of different cases where we were stonewalled, and we felt that there was something going on.
Kecksburg's a perfect example. I mean, you know, there was definitely suppression as far as Kecksburg goes.
Well,
you know.
Well, that case we could talk about for days.
I know.
And there's no doubt that, you know, the government knew and knows a lot more about that case than they've ever told the public.
Do you think that there really that this craft was actually seen again later over at Wright-Patterson?
Oh yeah,
Really?
and the reason I'll tell you that is because I had really good separate information from different people who had contacted me about. It first went actually to Lockbourne Air Force Base. How it came about, and I found this out in the summer of 1990, before we did that season premiere for Unsolved Mysteries on the case. That was the first big national TV show to really get into the case, and that opened up a lot for new information from around the country of different people who had moved away from the area, people who from around the country had details about the case, and it really, really helped open that story up. But in that summer, a man contacted me. He had an extensive background that I was able to check out, and he told me he was a part of the Air Force Security Police that had guarded the object when it came into Lockbourne Air Force Base outside of Columbus, Ohio, during the early morning hours of December 10th. And that fit in what we knew from others. Now, interestingly, another person who he didn't know and probably still doesn't know told me pretty much the same thing. Both told me that they used a certain entrance they normally didn't use to bring the military flatbed tractor-trailer truck with a tarped object on it, and they backed it into a hangar. And what he said was they set up a security perimeter around that hangar, and they were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody who approached that hangar without the proper authority.
Wow.
Now, he said he didn't stay on the team that much longer, but he heard that it had continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So after the Unsolved Mystery Show's TV aired, again, I had many, many leads. Fellow contacted me. This gentleman, he's now deceased. His name was Myron, and he said, I guess I'm allowed to talk to you about it now since it's on television. I said, what are you talking about? So he goes on to tell me how he worked for a large supply house in Ohio at the time. And interestingly, and a lot of details he gave us, we were able to check out. In fact, the late Len Stringfield, who is basically the father of UFO crash retrievals, he and I were very, very close and worked very close together on a lot of cases. He did a lot of investigation on the Ohio side on this case at the time. And anyhow, what we found out was that a Navy officer, and that's interesting because a lot of people didn't know, but before, on the Kecksburg case, early in the case, and as it was starting, before the Army and the Air Force and NASA and others were brought up, it was the Navy that first came up as being interested or involved in the case. So anyhow, what Myron tells it was that a Navy officer came to this supply house to order a large supply of a special type of glazed engineering brick to be taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So this was all within days after the object had been recovered in Pennsylvania. There was a second truck driver who initially did not want to get involved, didn't want to talk about it, but he later did. He later confirmed to Len and to myself that he was the first truck driver. He brought the first load of these bricks in to the base with an escort into the base. And when he got there the day before Meyer and he both went, that the flatbed trailer with the tarped object was outside of this warehouse building. And he said to him it looked like a big Liberty Bell just from the shape. That's the best way he could describe it. Another guy said it looked like a big chocolate drop. And the witnesses, of course, at the scene said it looked like a big acorn, like a big metallic acorn semi-buried in the ground with the hieroglyphic markings on it. So anyhow, we find out that the next day, Myron and this truck driver are escorted in to the base. And they have these 2 big loads of bricks, and they're just told, do your job, don't be looking around, just get the bricks on, unload the bricks. Well, they had been there for quite a while, and Myron was a curious kind of guy because he kept seeing these fellas that he was able to identify as Navy guys because he remembered seeing, he couldn't remember exactly where it was on the cap somewhere, but he saw an emblem or symbol that was Navy, and he was sure they had Navy. They had sidearms, they had, and they had various type of external protective items on, like rubber gloves. They were continually changing some of their outer clothing, and he was trying to figure out what's going on. So when he didn't see anybody around the entrance of that building, he ran over and looked inside that warehouse, and up on that scaffolding, and there's ladders going up. Here's that big metallic acorn-shaped object with the hieroglyphic markings on it, kind of an off-gold bronze color, and these guys are apparently trying to get inside of this thing. And anyhow, to make the story short, at some point he starts asking questions, and apparently he will soon realize that he didn't have the proper clearance, and he was threatened. And he was told, just keep your mouth shut, don't talk about what you see. If you do, we're going to throw you in jail and throw away the keys. But in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. But, of course, that never happened.
Sure.
And but anyhow, there's a lot more to the story. And anyhow, yeah, we have pretty good confidence. I mean, I know exactly what building they took it to. If I had access to the base, I could drive there right now. Now, whether it's still there today, who knows?
Well, that's just it, And, you said Navy intelligence, and that does make perfect sense. Yeah. Navy intelligence, they were kind of the big dog on the block back then, even though NASA did initiate investigations. Navy intelligence, they were the big dog.
Well, the Navy actually was the forerunner of a lot of the UFO investigations back in the 40s.
Yeah.
I mean, they got into it really deeply before later the Air Force and other agencies got involved in it. So they've had a long role in the UFO research for many years.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. Oh, very interesting. Oh, yeah. Maybe something will come out one day. I don't know. I doubt it, but this Kecksburg thing, it still bugs me somehow because when people come around and say, well, it's had something to do with a Russian satellite. Well, that's ridiculous. And the Nazi angle, the Nazi Bell angle is intriguing, but I don't know.
It's one of many, many theories. Next year, it's hard for me to believe the next year will mark 50 years I investigated the case. And I'm still getting leads on it. Even this year, on occasion, when I'm some local events, some old timer will come up to me and say, well, I was there that night. He said, I was a kid. I was there. I got stopped by the military and telling me about the soldiers and the Army trucks he saw. And they're still out there. There's still people out there who were involved and have never come public. And I truly believe somebody out there has the evidence. I truly believe from information I've gotten that somebody in this area has black and white photographs of the object on the ground, and some of the military units were there that night. And I'm hoping that someday I'm going to get that call, and somebody's going to say, I got these pictures, you're going to want to see them. I really believe they're out there. But next year will be 50 years, and by the way, in July we'll have the Kecksburg UFO Festival. I expect it'll be something very special. We've been getting huge crowds out there, especially this past year, and I expect next year for 50th it'll really be interesting. But anyhow, over the years, of the hundreds of people I've interviewed about the case, and a number of people approached me. And all these people were different people, and they all had different theories, and they said, I know for sure what the Kecksburg object was. And everybody had a different story. And there have been many, many theories. And, the first scenario we got happened at the time, we learned, it was from an Air Force officer who was investigating some people who lived in a family who were involved in the case and lived within walking distance of where it fell. And this officer told them that he had information that a Gemini capsule had been expelled in the area. And, of course, we know now that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy called me years ago and said, I know for certain it was a projectile fired from a giant gun from a railroad car in Canada. Well, we eliminated that pretty easy. Another person said he knew positively it was a Soviet ICBM that came down in the area. And it goes on and on and on. And, it wasn't until some books started coming out when they started talking about the Nazi Bell, Die Glock, that I started getting calls about it. And, it's an interesting theory. I really see no evidence the two are related. In fact, I've seen no evidence that convinces me that the Nazis ever came to completion on a project like that. There's no doubt they were working a lot of interesting aerodynamical experimentations, but I've seen no evidence that the Bell, which, depending on what you look at, some claim was an anti-gravity device or a time machine. I've seen no evidence that it was a maneuverable flying craft, because whatever this object was, you got to remember, this thing is moving relatively slowly. It's making change in direction along its trajectory, its path. It makes a slow descent. It's completely intact, no parachute seen, big enough for a man to stand inside of, no rivets, no weld marks, no seams, no wings, no fuselage. Kind of odd for 1965.
And it had hieroglyphics on it that nobody has any idea what they mean.
No. Well, no. And again, back in that time, the people out there basically, first, we now know that after it fell, some local civilians went down into the woods and came across a large metallic object semi-buried in the ground. Then a little later, you had firemen, and then you had the military coming in. Then once the military is there, the area is cordoned off, so people can't get down. But what they didn't know was that some civilians had already gotten down and had seen the object, and then later, numerous people around 1 o'clock in the morning see the military flatbed tractor-trailer leaving there with the tarped objects at a high rate of speed. So numerous people saw that flatbed going out of there. In fact, I now have evidence, and it's good data, that there were two military flatbeds at the scene that night. One I know went out earlier. The other one with the object went out around 1 o'clock in the morning. They went to apparently two different locations. And there's so many details, amazing details about this case we uncovered. And there's a lot of interesting things. And, there's pretty good evidence that there was a government cover-up, that they haven't told the public the truth about what happened. And one interesting little tidbit was, for those interested in this aspect of it, that one fella who apparently was hiding down in the woods at the time and kept his story quiet for years and years and years. I mean, it wasn't until I had a lead on this guy back. I got his name came up to me again in November 2002 when the Sci-Fi Channel and the Coalition for Freedom of Information were doing a big investigation on this case. And I had a list of names of people who were willing to talk to me, and this guy's name had come up, I think it was like 13 years before, as a fellow who had been hiding down in the woods. And I got a lead on him. When I contacted him, he didn't deny it. He just told me he was afraid of getting in trouble with the government, and his family didn't want him involved, and he just didn't want to get involved. But then in 2002, I did get to interview him finally, spent a lot of time and many interviews with him, and he told me some amazing things and unusual things. But one thing he brought up was that as he's hiding down in the woods that afternoon, so this was probably soon after it fell, he was there just as things were beginning to unfold. He sees civilians coming in, then he sees Army and Air Force coming in. He was in the military, so he knew what he was seeing. He kept hiding in the woods and moving back into the thicker trees and keeping branches around him so they couldn't see him. But the interesting thing was, he's telling me about these fellows down there, one guy in particular, and he said, he said, I don't know why to be a politician down there. He wasn't sure it was a senator or congressman. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, yeah. He said, I understand why he would be down in the woods. And I said, why? And he said, well, this guy's dressed in a dress suit, a tie, and a dress hat. And he's telling the military people what to do. And this guy had a camera, and he called the craft, the object, whatever you want to call it, he called it the Hickey. And he said this guy kept taking all kind of photographs of the Hickey. And so So anyhow, he went on and gave me a long scenario of some odd things that happened and what he saw, and but he wasn't the only one to talk about the fact that there apparently were government personnel and some interesting characters on the scene that night.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to believe that nobody got a picture of it. For as many people that did see it come down and started gravitating to that area right after it happened. It took the military over an hour to get there, didn't it?
Well, you got to remember, this happened about 4:47 in the afternoon.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's just about dark. Well, let me tell you, if you could ride around that area for days and nights, and you'd never possibly be able to see the impact site down the middle of the woods in the ravine.
Yeah.
So unless you knew where it was, you couldn't possibly see it from anywhere. So the military could easily have rode around it for hours until somebody took them down to the site. They would have had no idea where it was.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one thing. It's very hard to determine exactly how long it was before the military started arriving. I believe it was several hours later that they began to come in more in numbers, but there are some witnesses who swear that within the hour they began to see at least a minor military presence, which means that there very well could have been some local military units or somebody was activated to start out initially and look, but most of the military seemed to come in during the early evening hours. And there's so many accounts from so many different people. What was so interesting is the fact that, as this is being broadcast on Pittsburgh area radio and TV, that this object had fallen, well, then hundreds of people descend on the small farming community to try to get down and take a look at this thing, and they can't get anywhere near it. In fact, where most of these people were, up on this high lookout with this narrow winding road, they didn't realize the thing actually fell far on the opposite side down in this ravine. And it was on the opposite side where most of the military activity was taking place. So it depends on where you were, what you saw.
I was wondering if, now, did any of the airports or any of the military get a track on this thing as it was coming in?
Okay. Officially, the only government document that ever showed up was the Air Force Project Blue Book report. And it's not under Kecksburg. It's listed on Acme, Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I've felt for years the reason for that was because I know an Air Force officer interviewed some family members who had been involved in the case and within walking distance of where it fell, but their mailing address is under Acme, PA, not Kecksburg. And so I believe that's why it's always been listed that way. But officially, the government says this thing was never tracked by radar. However, sources I had over the years, and they were some good sources, told me independently it was definitely being tracked over a great distance. They had tracked this thing for quite a distance. That's probably how they activated the unit so quickly. They had a pretty good idea where it was going to come down, not the exact area, but the general area, so they had the moving. And another detail I came up with in more recent years, because now I have enough independent people who now confirm this, and it's something I had hardly anything on many years ago. But now we got enough data that confirmed that there was at least one, possibly two military jets from at least Ohio into areas of Pennsylvania that were pursuing the object.
Oh, well, that's new.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think they almost would have had some idea of that something was moving in there. It's kind of hard to believe that it didn't have some type of track on it.
Oh, yeah. I truly believe it did.
Yeah.
I still sit here in awe listening to this, the Kecksburg story, because it's been one that's been on the books for a long time. And to me, it's amazing that still to today, new details emerge. And Stan, you've been investigating for 55 years, which I told Lon is twice as long as I've been on planet Earth. So you are to be commended, sir, for your long service to this field.
Oh, thank you very much. Yep. I'm sure my parents had no idea that when they gave me that brand new AM radio on my 10th birthday back in 1959, that would start me on this, whatever you want to call it, this really unusual search. And that's how it all started, right around Halloween when I'm tuning around the radio dial that night, and there's some radio shows talking about flying saucers and haunted houses. And I was a youngster interested in science and electronics from a very young age, and I got out there and started reading everything and started making scrapbooks or newspaper stories, and that's how it all began. Then I'm 16 years old when the Kecksburg incident happened, and I started working on that case that day, and I've been pursuing it ever since.
Wow.
And I think that's a great place to end for today, gentlemen.
Yes.
Where it all began. Stan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. I know the folks are going to love this program. Lon, any final thoughts, questions, comments?
I just want to thank Stan again for coming on with us, for making himself available to us. It's great talking to him.
Well, it's great talking to you guys, too. I like to mention that people want to check current events, current sightings, go to my website at stangordon.info. And if they'd like to pick up a copy of my Silent Invasion book, A Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, it's available on Amazon or personal copies through my website.
It's a great book.
There you have it, folks. stangordon.info. You've been listening to Arcane Radio, Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, and this week's special guest, Stan Gordon. Folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.